Hi guys, my temperature blanket for 2019 is complete. It's actually behind me and I will be putting some videos in and pictures in of it laying out flat. But I want to kind of just do this intro and say that it was definitely a process to do, and it is something that I would recommend people do like in the future to try to tackle. And what I'm going to share is some of the tips that I've kind of shared in other videos and maybe some new tips as well. But first, I know what everyone wants to see is the blanket, so I'm going to put the blanket in videos in now, and then if you want to stick around till after those parts if you want to hear my tips and tricks and just again my overall view of having done this blanket. We have January up at the top. As you can tell, it doesn't hang off the sides as much. I may later on add more white border to the sides, but I'm pleased with it right now. In December, we come around here. December is what hangs off the bottom, or the end of the bed. But it's all complete. As you can see, the blanket became huge. And as I kept saying all along, it was going to go on my queen size blanket. So I thought I'd give you a rough estimate of how long and how wide it ended up being. I had to look at my cheat sheet because I measured it. The length of it from the top of the bed to what hung over the bed was 95 inches long. And the width of it was around 64. And again, as you can tell, it didn't hang over the sides of the bed too much, which was perfectly fine with me. Later on, if I want to, I can just add some more white border just along the sides if I wanted to, because I don't want to add any more to the length of it. But again, it was definitely a process. And as I've said in other videos, I just did a single crochet row for every day at whatever the temperature was at noon. But if you're going to tackle one, your best bet is just to kind of figure out what's going to work for you. Should you do a specific time of day? Should you do the high and low? Some people do one row, some people do two. Some people are crocheting, knitting, or loom knitting it. It's about finding out what works for you. And one of the ways to let you know what method you want to use is going to work the best is, as I mentioned before, is swatches. You need to do swatches to figure out if the yarn you have is going to be too thick where you're going to end up with a huge blanket. I'm sure if I had picked a bulkier yarn, my blanket would have went well past the length that I wanted. So it was important that you kind of do up a sample of maybe 7 days worth of temperatures, measure that, and kind of times that by how many weeks are in the year, and they'll give you an idea of how much of a blanket you're going to end up with at the end. I think it's really important to take that time and do that. I've had people ask me personally, like, how do I do this knitted, how many rows, and what row or stitch should I do? And again, it's about trying it out. I knew that I wasn't going to loom knit it, so I immediately went to crochet and knew I would probably do just one row a day. And then doing the double crochet. Again, the whites that you see are separating the months, and at the end and at the top of it, there's actually like 3 double crochet rows, and there's only 2 double crochet rows along the outside edge. But so that kind of added some of my length math. So keep in mind, if you're planning on adding a color in between the months, you want to take that into account. If you're going to be going around the project for a border, that's going to add some width to your project and length, so kind of keep those things in mind. But again, I just wanted to kind of share like the tips I've talked about, because I'm still getting questions about them on some of my later videos of like, how did you do this? How much yarn? That's the other questions. How much yarn? I can't tell you. I started with yarn I already had in stock, and then I most of the time over the year would buy 1 or 2 extra in that color. I just kind of went by that. I know I completely used a good amount of skein, at least 1 to 2 skeins of each color. And I bought the bigger skeins of the Red Heart Super Saver yarn. I bought the ones that were bigger, not the smaller size ones. So I still have a bunch of those left, so I didn't get through them all. But if we're loom knitting or crocheting or whatever, I didn't feel like it was a bad investment because I can use these colors in future projects. So that's one thing that's kind of lucky for us if we're doing a temperature blanket, is you'll use the yarn that you have left over. So it's not as if you're buying for a specific craft that you may never do again. You are going to be continuing to use that yarn in other projects. So don't be afraid of that. Just kind of pick colors that you feel you could get easily. Like, be careful about ones that might be more like a seasonal one, because then you might have a hard time finding them if you need that color. Surprisingly, as I panned down the blanket, I don't know if you noticed, but in December, which I believe is this side of me, I actually ended up using some green that I didn't think I would use. I still had green, but I was really surprised I still hit 40-degree weather and I had to use it in December. So that was kind of a surprise. So I can't tell you need this much. It depends on the weather you have. You may have a month where maybe you never see a different temperature range and stuff, and you're using that same color, you're going to go through it faster. Another tip, is not to let yourself get too far behind. I've said this in other videos that I was a week behind, and I actually regret that. Looking back, I really wish I would have stuck with staying on time with it and not allowing myself more than maybe a couple days behind. Each row took me anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes, so by allowing myself to get over a week behind, that just made a lot more catch up. So if you're going to do this, I really would suggest stay on top of it as best you can. Don't allow yourself to get really far behind. Once you know how long it takes you to do a row, really think, okay, I can't get past this many days, and just try to stick with it. You'll be glad you did, because the project will be done a lot faster and you won't have to play catch up at the end of the month. I just wanted to quickly mention something that I didn't mention in the other parts that I filmed, so this is kind of being inserted into this video. I wanted to share something I thought was kind of interesting and funny, is I tried to do my best to calculate how much time I spent on this blanket, doing the rows and everything like that. The only thing I didn't really try to estimate my time for was weaving in the ends, which took a lot more time. But give or take, just doing the blanket, not worrying about the weaving in the ends right now, I did math. Hang on a second. Roughly for just doing the rows and doing the double borders and doing the borders around, I probably spent about 7,720 minutes on this blanket, not counting the weaving in the ends. But I didn't want to deal with that because I didn't keep track of that, and that took me a while. So if you estimate off that, that means roughly, give or take, this blanket, I probably put about 129 hours into minimum. That's not counting, again, the weaving of the ends, which would have added a little more time to it. And if I take that and like an average pay rate of maybe, I don't know, $11.75, because I think that's a little more than minimum wage where I live. If you take that and you times it by my time of 129 hours, this blanket is valued at over $1,500. I forget the exact number, I didn't write the exact. I was just impressed that it was an over $1,500 blanket if you count my time. And like I said, $11.75 is kind of average of a pay around where I live. I think it's a little more than minimum wage, unless minimum wage went up. I'd have to look into that. But I just use that as kind of a guideline. And so that is just what's crazy to think, that if somebody would say, well, how much do you charge to make a temperature blanket? And you're just thinking, well, I've got to invest my whole year into it. And if you were to look at somebody and say, well, it's going to cost you $1,500, you know that they're going to be like, heck no. But that's not even counting the cost of yarn. Like, I had some yarn to begin with, but then you figure probably another like 100 maybe invested or so in yarn, depending on where I bought the yarn, if it was on sale, prices vary. So even if you say you spend another 100 or 200 supplies to make sure you have enough yarn, it's just that it just brings us back to the question of always, like, how do you price your items? Because nobody would pay $1,500 for this blanket, even though that is compensating me just in a sense just for my time. But I just thought it was really kind of cool to be like, yeah, if someone comes in like, that's a cool blanket, yeah, only is around, it's valued at $1,500, and they're gonna look at me like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, when you spend close to 130 hours, give or take, like I said, there's definitely more than 130 hours put into this for the weaving of the ends and that. It's just crazy to think, that means that, we really need to be more aware of our time, and that we're doing these crafts, and you really need to just decide when you're making something for somebody, don't ever like undervalue your time too much. I mean, granted, no one's gonna pay you your minimum wage an hour to work on a project. I get that, but I was just doing that as like, if this was a job, you know, and I got paid to do it, and I got paid around minimum wage, what would it be? So really think about that for you, like where you live, what's your minimum wage and the time that you put in. And a lot of people think, well, it's not that big of a deal, you know, hat should be cheap and this and that. And I try to keep my prices cheaper when I do make stuff, but it's just really, I think people need to be more aware that a lot of times us crafters don't get back you know, what time we spent into something. We don't make back what we spend. So always when you see someone that's done a temperature blanket, you see someone that's done any other kind of craft project, we can look at it and be like, wow, we know a lot of time was invested. And I just think it's kind of fun. So I mean, maybe you'll do a temperature blanket and you'll keep track of roughly the time you spend on it, and you'll look at the end of the year and be able to value yourself and be like, wow, you know, it may only be a blanket, but that's a pretty good, you know, chunk of change for that blanket. I hope you like this little insert I did. I thought it was kind of a funny little thing to include in there. I was going to include like the what temperature I saw the most in that, but I already panned my blanket, so you can kind of get an idea of what colors showed up a lot. So I didn't want to do that, but I thought this was a little more fun. The other thing that's important is to have a support system. I have a group for the temperature blanket. I'll have the link down below. I'm keeping that group open that I started for 2019's blanket. It's going to be the temperature support blanket, so if you're doing a temperature blanket or any other kind of temperature project, you can join that group and get support from others that are doing it as well. I'll still be popping in there from time to time to give support or tips or advice or anything like that, but I wanted to keep it going for those that I wanted to tackle it this year or even in the future, so you can have a place to go and kind of see what people have done and hopefully get the support you need to continue doing another project, because again, it is something I think everyone should enjoy. The other tip is to weave your ends in as you go. I regret this. That took me so long when I finally caught up on my temperatures and I was done, and here it is, you know, almost 2 weeks into the new year, and I'm finally finished this like yesterday, because weaving the ends was so boring and so tedious that even though I was weaving in the ends and then I would do part of my border right behind it to kind of do a 2-in-1 kind of process, it was very tedious and a lot longer than I thought to do one side of a queen size blanket. I think it took me hours to do, and I was getting up and I was walking around because I was like, my hands were hurting. So I would definitely suggest maybe at the end of each month, go ahead and weave in your ends as each month ends, and then that way you'll be one step closer to it being done when you hit the last day of the month, and then you'll just have to decide whether you're going to do a border around it or not. Some people would choose not to do one, that's fine, and that means you'd be totally done. So again, weave your ends in as you go, because that's something that I did regret not doing. But overall, I enjoyed doing this project. It was kind of interesting. You know, I kind of had some good days and bad days in there. There were days that I was kind of feeling a little down and everything, you know, the days I was really happy to do it. And my daughter, what was really sweet is when my daughter kind of, at the end, I laid the blanket out, and she kind of like was climbing on it, and she's like, Mom, you put so much work into this. And it was just kind of nice that she recognized the work, because she sat in a chair seeing me work on this thing all year long. I had that blue bin that was always by my chair, and like I got to put that away last night. Confused my cat because he was always lying on it. And then my daughter came down and she's like, Mom, I can walk over here now, there's not the tote. And I'm like, yeah, I was so glad to get rid of that tote in my living room. So, but it was good to have a place to contain it, and I knew that if I didn't have it right next to me, I would have probably gotten even further behind on working on it than I had been. So again, keep your project kind of where you can see it, because you're not going to want to lug this thing out all the time. I kind of kept it right by me. It was probably in the way, it was annoying, you know, when you're sweeping and mopping and having to move that thing every time, but I knew that if I put a different spot in my house or in my downstairs, I wouldn't have worked on it as much. I needed to be where I could see it. So that's another tip, is keep the project where you can see it and work on it. That's where a tote's your friend, because it'll be contained and nobody can hurt it, an animal can't get into it if you have a cat or a dog, and you can pull it out when you need to. And the other thing is, periodically lay the blanket out to show you how far you've come. When I did that July video where I had laid it out for the first like half of the year, I really enjoyed seeing that, because it really made my work visible more. Because when I'm sitting here and doing it, you only see what you're working on, and even though it's all down, you know, on the floor, I couldn't really appreciate what I was doing because I wasn't seeing it. So again, maybe after a few months, like halfway through the year, or even every maybe 3 months or so, lay it out and just admire what you're doing, and maybe that'll keep you going to finish it. I know a lot of people say they want to do one and they just don't feel like they couldn't believe that I had the patience and stuff to do this, but I had a reason. I was filming for you guys every month to show you it. So make sure you do have that support system and accountability of somebody that's going to say, hey, wait a minute, you're behind, get this done. I had the accountability of making these videos for you guys, so that helped me. So find someone that will kind of hold you accountable. It doesn't have to be somebody that's doing the project. For me, a lot of my support came from my neighbor. My neighbor, Carissa, was always encouraging me to work on the blanket, and she was just kind of like listening to me talking about, oh my goodness, I don't want to do it. It's not, but she was encouraging of it, along with a lot of other family and friends I have that don't even do anything with knitting. They were all very encouraging, and they could probably care less. I'm sure their eyes glazed over every time I talked about this temperature blanket, but at the same time they were supportive for me to finish it, and that's what you need. And I hope this kind of helps with some of these tips that I've shared before, and a couple new perspective after it being done. It's definitely a project I enjoyed doing in retrospect, but in the process, it was definitely tedious at times. But I would suggest trying to do one. If you don't want to do a whole year, do a half a year. Maybe do a scarf or some smaller project, and just kind of make sure you rest your hands as much as you can. I noticed that was a problem I had too. My hands just kind of weren't liking it, so I'd have to try stretching them out and stuff, and just giving them breaks. So that's what took so long to weave in the ends and do the borders. I had to take breaks, and I just was like, I don't want to do it anymore. I just want these ends weaved in. So I took a few days off from doing the other side. I wish I wouldn't have. So really just try to stay on top of it, and you will really enjoy seeing the project when it's done. Have a great day, everyone. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified of future videos. No more temperature blanket videos. Have a good day, everyone.